So in the previous class we have learned about words, simple and complex words, and how a particular sound and meaning remains attached to any word, right? And today we will deal with morphemes, right? And to begin with, the very definition of morphemes, right? What is a morpheme or what are morphemes, right? So the definition says the basic parts of a complex word, that is the different building blocks that make it up, are called morphemes. The basic parts of a complex word, that is the different building blocks that make it up, are called morphemes. This is the very definition of morphemes, right? Or the same thing can be stated in a different way by saying that morphemes are the minimal units of word building in a language. They cannot, this you have to keep in mind, that they cannot be broken down into any further recognizable or meaningful parts, right? So what is a morpheme or what are morphemes? Morphemes are the minimal units of word building in a language. In any language, morphemes constitute the minimal possible units, right? And they cannot be broken down into any further recognizable or meaningful parts. So in the previous class I also taught you about nouns and simple words and how plural endings s or es can easily be attached to simple words in case of nouns, and a complex word or words can be easily be formed, right? So what was the first simple word? For instance, if we have a simple word boy, for example, if we have a simple word boy and if we add a plural ending s, it forms a complex word boys. In the similar fashion, if we have a simple word tree and we add a plural ending s, a complex word is formed, which is trees. Similarly, we have a simple word. Similarly, we have a simple word dog, and if we attach a plural ending s to it, we get a complex word dogs. And one another example we will consider, this is a simple word bush, and if we add a plural ending es, we get a complex word bushes. So from bush, by adding es, it becomes bushes. So in this fashion, I just taught you earlier that nouns or simple words can easily be attached to plural endings s or es, and a complex word or complex words can be easily be formed. Now moving ahead, we will very quickly try to understand how morphemes are classified, right? And so I have written here classification of morphemes, right? So there are two possible ways in which we can easily classify morphemes, right? The same thing can be done, the same task can be done in two different ways, right? So, and what is the task? We are trying to classify morphemes, right? So the first method to understand this is that, as you can see from this chart, that morphemes are divided into at least two different categories. The first one is a base morpheme and the other one is a plural morpheme, and the example for each one of them is base morpheme will be something like this. Example, tree, right? So this is an example of a base morpheme. Similarly, in the case of plural morpheme, what we will have either s or es, right? So in this way, morphemes can be classified. There are two different categories. The first category is of base morphemes and the other one is called the plural morpheme. Now the same thing can be understood and classified in this manner as well, right? So morphemes are divided again in two different categories, right? The first one is free morphemes and the other one is bond morphemes, right? So morphemes are again classified into two different types, right? Morphemes can be classified in this way also, and we get morphemes divided into two different categories. The first one is free morphemes and the other one is bond morphemes. And what does this imply? This implies that free morphemes are those morphemes which can stand alone as an independent word. which can stand alone as an independent word. For example, tree. So you can say that the word tree is a free morpheme or a base morpheme, right? So both of them are equally correct and true. So the word tree is a free morpheme as well as a base morpheme. Now coming to bond morphemes. Bond morphemes are those morphemes which cannot stand alone but remains attached to a base morpheme, right? An example is like plural ending s or es. What are base morphemes? Base morphemes are those morphemes which cannot stand alone but remains attached to a base morpheme, right? For example, s or es. So bond morphemes are the same thing as plural morphemes, right? In this fashion you can understand. So these are the two different ways of classifying morphemes. Either you can say that morphemes are of two types. The first one is base morpheme or a plural morpheme, right? The same thing can be stated in a different way. You can say that morphemes are of two types: free morphemes and bond morphemes. Free morphemes are those morphemes which can stand alone as an independent word. For instance, the word tree. Now coming to bond morphemes. Bond morphemes are those morphemes which cannot stand alone but remains attached to a base morpheme, such as the plural ending s or es. So bond morphemes are one and the same thing like plural morpheme, right? Plural morpheme and bond morphemes are one and the same thing. Similarly, base morpheme and free morphemes are one and the same thing. So as I told you earlier, morphemes are of two different types: free morphemes and bond morphemes. So what are free morphemes? Free morphemes are independent words, such as I gave you the example of the word tree or boy, which can stand alone and they have independent existence. But what about bond morphemes, right? Bond morphemes are primarily affixes. What we call them? We call them affixes, and affixes are of two different types: prefixes and suffixes, right? Try to understand it very carefully. This one is the category of bond morphemes, and bond morphemes are primarily affixes, right? And affixes are of two different types: prefixes and suffixes. What are prefixes and suffixes? We will understand by quoting one example, right? So by citing an example, you will clearly understand what are prefixes and suffixes. For instance, in prefixes we have this word re, right? We have this prefix re. When we use it and attach it before a word, before a free morpheme, like there is a free morpheme right, this can exist as an independent word. There is this word think. These two words can exist independently. Now when we add the prefix re to these two words, it becomes, when we add re as prefix to the word think, it becomes rethink, right? Similarly, if we add prefix re with the word right, or you can say a free morpheme right, it becomes rewrite. So the prefix re can be used to make words like rewrite and rethink. Now coming down to the other example of affixes, which is suffix. These are the endings or words which come after a free or independent word, such as, if we have, let's consider the example of a word central, or let's consider another example. We have a word modern. Now if we add eyes as in suffix, right? Suffixes are those bond morphemes which comes after a free morpheme, So if we have this free morpheme central, or we have this example of modern, and we add eyes to it, what does it becomes? It becomes central plus eyes, centralized, right? Modern plus eyes, it becomes modernized. You can understand in this way that we have this free morpheme central, or we have this free morpheme modern, and we add the suffix "ize" to it. So what does it will become? It will become centralize. It will become centralize. This will become modernize, right? So morphemes are primarily of two different types: free morpheme and bond morphemes. Within the bond morpheme, we have primarily affixes. Now within affixes, we have two different categories. The first category is of prefixes, and the other one is of suffixes, right? So in prefixes, what we do? We have this example of the prefix re, and if we place this re before the free morpheme right, it becomes rewrite. Similarly, if we add this prefix re with the free morpheme think, it becomes rethink. Now in the suffixes, for instance, we have this suffix "ize". If we add "ize" with this free morpheme central or with this free morpheme modern, what does they become? They become centralize and modernize.